Welcome to Spring LIB.
All right, so this question is basically asking for your understanding of what an endemic species is and the logical explanations for why they might occur, given what you know about biology and evolution and ecology so far. So let's take a look first at endemic species themselves. These are species that are completely unique to a given area, meaning they're only found in this one area, nowhere else. One really easy way to conceptualize them is to sort of think of islands, which actually do tend to have a large number of endemic species, especially if they're relatively far away from mainlands or other islands. Um, so in this example, I have kind of drawn a fictional island, but you can think of places like New Zealand and Madagascar, especially, that have, let's say, a really large carnivore that's kind of like a mongoose or a rodent of some kind that's not really found anywhere else. You can have insects that are, a lot larger than those on the mainland. You can have birds that are a lot smaller than those on the mainland. And these are completely unique species that only survive or are found in this island specifically. Now let's think about why that might occur. And here we can start to look at the questions that were given, or the multiple choice options were given in this question. Um, the first one, option A, is that these isolated areas, and this is where we kind of have to pay close attention to the language of each option itself, because the way that they organize these is kind of tricky and it depends on what comes first in these prompts, sort of. The first tells us that these isolated areas have given high temperature conditions for species to evolve, and the temperature differences led to evolution of new characteristics so they could survive there, and that's what happened. Now, in some cases, high temperatures might be what have caused unique characteristics to evolve, and then these unique characteristics lead to speciation, but that's not always the case. Like in this example, for instance, the mainland, which is like very far away from the island, has about the same temperature as the island itself. Now, that's not always the case, but it's not always a high temperature either. So that case is a bit too specific, so we can probably put it aside for now. Option B says that these isolated areas have provided a unique environment for species to evolve in, and then these unique environments have led to the characteristics they have that led to speciation eventually. Now that basically makes more sense than option A. Um, so we can hold on to that for a second and let's read through the other ones and just, you know, read more carefully and figure out which one of these is right. Option C tells us that species are introduced into some isolated areas, which provide them unique environments. And then these species retain their unique characteristics because of speciation and adapting to these unique environments. So in this case, we have species being introduced into their environments, as opposed to the environment sort of being plopped onto them, which makes sense because if you think about, let's take this bird. How might a bird cross from a mainland to the island? Well, the ancestral bird probably flew over there. And these cases have been reported in real life, as in birds flying thousands and thousands of miles in order to reach a particular island where they're kind of stuck now. Also, mammals or insects have sort of floated on debris in the ocean or even been picked up by the wind, like in pollen and stuff, and been dropped off on the island. So in this case, the species are being introduced to the area. So option C, now it's starting to look like another possible answer. Now let's look at option D and just see what it says. Now in this case, a unique environment is again provided to species to evolve in vitro, and then they are introduced to geographically isolated areas. Now, this is basically saying that a unique environment, totally new, not found anywhere else on Earth, is introduced to a species, and then the organism that's going to evolve to adapt to it is still in the womb, and then when they're born, they then get put into these unique environments, and then speciation happens, etc. Um, as we've kind of explained, that's not really how that works, nor does it make sense if you actually think about what evolution is, which is passing down of traits and characteristics that, and then natural selection in particular, which is what this question is kind of looking at, being how these traits impact survival. Um, and this change over time is evolution itself. Um, so in that case, we can probably go ahead and cut D out. So let's look back closely at B and C, which are our two sort of main contenders right now. We have geographically isolated areas have provided a unique environment for certain species to evolve, versus certain species are introduced into some geographically isolated areas which provide them unique environments. Now, in this case, because endemic species usually arise because there is nothing like them left on the mainland, because they have evolved to be so distinct from anything else. So in this case, they are often they're first introduced because there is nothing else on the island, say, that they can interbreed with and keep up the mainland characteristics with. And so, in this case, it seems like option C, given that they're the ones being introduced to the environment and not the environment being introduced to them, sort of, makes the most sense.